Okay. So, thank you so much again for doing this. My name is Yesenia. I'm an intern at Urban Health Media Project, a nonprofit that trains young journalists to report on different health issues, including mental health. And we do Therapy Thursday every last Thursday of the month. And so this month, we're going to be talking about how culture affects people's approach to mental health, um, which I myself, I'm Mexican, so I can attest to the fact that it actually does influence people's perception. So again, thank you so much for doing this. And I'm gonna get started by introducing our guest, and we're gonna start with Victoria, who's to my right. And Victoria is a native of Maryland, Prince George, and she is also a mental health advocate who struggled a lot with communicating with her family when she was younger, and people didn't realize it because they thought that it was the perfect black family, and it was a struggle for her, but she has learned to kind of cope with it in many ways. And so she also just told us that she's director of the mental health in her church. So amazing. And then we have Janeth, who's under me, and she is Mexican American, and she just completed her master's in social work last year at Fordham University. So again, amazing. We have amazing guests. And then to my bottom right, we have Kit, who is an Asian American therapist based in Flushing, Queens, and he is also the assistant director of the mental health department at Charles B. Wang Community Health Center, and he has been working as a mental health therapist for around 20 years. So thank you so much. And we are going to get started with our first question, which is how does people's cultural background affect their perception of mental health? And we can get started with you, Victoria.
So yeah, I obviously am a Black woman, African American, and I grew up in a predominantly Christian home. And so you kind of have, that intersection of cultures. The Black church is an institution in and of itself. And so growing up a lot, and even unfortunately still now, when the conversation or the topic of mental health comes up a lot, in Black families and Black Christian families especially, you hear a lot of, oh, I don't need to talk to a therapist. All I need is Jesus. Just pray about it. Things of that sort. And so growing up, it was definitely hard it was hard for me to even realize that I was, dealing with some of the things that I was dealing with. I didn't have the language for it because, it wasn't something that was talked about. Culturally, a lot of times in Black families, we do a good job of talking around things. And not necessarily always addressing the issues head on. And so a lot of times, it was hard, like I said, to communicate what I was feeling or dealing with, because I just didn't have the language. I didn't have a concept of what was happening. And then when I finally did come to the realization of what I was dealing with, it was very hard to talk about it to other people because I either knew for sure or felt like, what I was feeling or what I was dealing with was going to be dismissed or minimized. As I've gotten older, I've realized that it's really more so people, again, not having the language and not having the tools. And so, one of my goals is to really just one thing I noticed, what I love about being a Black person is that, we love to talk and we do love to communicate. Communication is a big part of our culture. I just think we need to find ways to just start conversations, honestly, because what I've seen is that once you kind of open the door, I know for myself, once you kind of open the door for certain people to start the conversation, then, it, kind of warms them up a little bit to realize like, okay, well, this isn't weird. I'm not alone. This is something that I can talk about. So it's really my goal to really just start more conversations, and to, break down those cultural barriers that we have in our community, about even just talking about mental health, because it's like before we even get to people being willing to seek out a therapist, I think it first starts with even feeling comfortable with talking to your mental health with your family and with your friends. I think it starts there, talking with people that and trust first before you can go talk to. I know a lot of people, they don't want to talk to a stranger. A lot of like, oh, I don't want I don't want somebody knowing all my business. I'm like, sometimes you need that unbiased perspective. But yeah, I think there's a lot of trauma that's held in a lot of families. And one thing that I do know is that, and I think we can all kind of attest to this generationally, I think some of our parents and grandparents, they were in survival mode. They didn't have access. And rather than allow the freedom for their children and grandchildren to do something different, I think there's still a lot of fear and a lot of just kind of scarcity mindset thinking and still being stuck in survival mode. And, not realizing that like we can do something differently. Like we actually do have access to different resources. We don't have to be scared to speak up about what we're going through. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I agree. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest like factors, right? Like, at least for my family, they were more so worried about just getting through every day, and I mean, there was a lot of things that we were missing that were pretty basic, and so I think that's actually a determining factor. But what do you think, Janeth?
Yeah, actually, Victoria touched a very important part that I was thinking as she was talking. Um, Sometimes we don't have the time to feel. We don't have the time to process those emotions. They just come, we put it in the back of our head, and we continue because we can't just break down, and because bills have to be paid, children need to be seen and so, but we kind of forget that, yes, all of this is happening, but it does affect us. It affects in our daily life. Sometimes we can't sleep, or our appetite is different. We overeat, or we don't eat at all, and we think that that's because just we're tired or we're busy, but no, that's part of mental health. From my experience and my background, I really never realized I was depressed until I was forced to go to therapy, and I was just like, oh, okay. And even then, I guess I didn't realize. I thought it was just a teen going through something, and I had to speak with someone. And later on, I understood a lot of behavior of my youth, and it could have been different if maybe somebody would have asked me, how are you feeling? And yes, my parents were there, but they weren't taught how to. Also, like she mentioned, they were in survival mode. So yeah, I definitely culture plays a big role. And it's good to have these conversations for us to reach out to those who are in thinking about what to do in the next step.
Absolutely. Yeah, I again agree. I mean, we're both Mexican, so we kind of share a lot of cultural values. What do you, according to your professional experience, Kid, and I mean personal, what would you say are cultural backgrounds affect people perception?
Well, let's start, with like, some professional, aspect. Well, when we actually talk with the patients, the first things that we need to get them understand is they are having depressions or they are having anxiety. Sometimes people come in saying, oh, I keep having stomach ache. I don't know what happened. It takes a while sometimes to actually, get people to understand that, oh, you're actually having depressions, anxiety, or some other things. One of the things that we nowadays actually talk a lot is to trauma. We actually talk a lot of attachment trauma, the traumas that we grew up with, that we didn't even realize that there was actually a trauma because it wasn't like, we were being beaten up, but we were never getting, the care that we actually supposed to get. Oh, that actually, caused me trouble, we never know about that until nowadays. So the first thing is we need to be able to understand and accept that this is the problem for us to be able to get what we want to, think probably help. Like, for example, if I don't think that I have headache, I'm not going to get a painkiller, so it makes no sense, So if you give me a painkiller and tell me that, oh, that's going to help, but I mean, why, how's that going to help? I don't know, So there's actually a lot of things, going on. For first, trying to actually get people define their problem, accept the problem. And the next things that come with the culture, or actually, I would say family values too, is the label that comes along if you accept the help. What does it mean if you actually accept that you have a mental health problem? What does it mean if you actually start getting mental health treatment? The label or the, stereotypes that comes along with you, and your family is going to see that, okay, well, why are you not talking to us about that? I see a lot of young people. I mean, that's bad, because a lot of time the parents come in, the first thing they said is, they never told me about this. And the first thing that, I actually have to tell the parents is, your kids actually is depressed and even suicidal. And from time to time, the worst things even happen is by the time that we actually see them the first time, we have to send them to Yale because they actually have active suicidal thought. So there's a lot of things that comes together, when the culture, and the problem happen and what it takes, to get better. I think I echo everything that you guys said, that's actually one thing that's a little bit, different. My personal experience. My mom actually had depression and hallucinations. I was actually teenagers at that time. I couldn't understand what's going on. I only see her crying hysterically every day. But I guess, she never really believed, that's actually depression either until I went to college and studied counseling. So my whole life actually feels like I'm trying to make sense of something that I seen, as a teenagers and trying to actually figure out how to help people with that. So that's a little bit, different, but, that's my personal experience.
Do you think that impacted your career path significantly?
Obviously,
Yeah.
So I have to admit that sometimes it feels like, this is actually a resolution for me, for me being able to be a therapist and help people, especially young people, if they struggle and they don't know what's going on. Yeah, I feel like, I'm actually helping myself,
Right, yeah. Therapy, I guess, therapeutic in a way.
I
Absolutely.
I think that I'm pursuing this as well because in the process of becoming a clinical social worker, I'm also healing and understanding the people around me when I grew up. So family, individuals that played an important part, definitely. But it's gratifying at the same time. It's good to be able to pick up of a lot of things when you were younger as healing process and getting other stuff other than therapy to be a better person in a way.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that being the case, you whatever your experience is, kind of determines what you want to be. I myself, journalism is like I wanted to pursue journalism because I saw a lot of unfair things being done to like my people, and so I was like, we need to expose these people and we need to like let everyone know. So I can relate to that. Um, we can move on to the next question, which is I think we kind of touched a little bit on that, but I guess we can deep a little further, which is what are your personal slash professional experiences dealing with this? And again, whatever you have anything to add, you can just go ahead and jump in. But if you don't, we can just move on to the next question.
I can kind of touch on that. So personal personal and professional experiences. So my first personal experience with anything related to mental health in a, I guess, in a tangible way. I don't know if that's the best word. But I think I shared it with Yesenia. I can't remember. But so the reason I even got connected with Urban Health Media Project is because I was contacted by Jane, you guys' founder, because I've been vocal on my social media more in recent years. When I was 17, I actually attempted suicide by overdosing on Vicodin, and so that basically was kind of like the jump start for me kind of being, and I think someone else might have mentioned it, just kind of like a lot of people's first experiences is like you kind of are like forced to go. It's like and I feel like I see that far too often where therapy or any kind of mental health or psychiatric intervention, it's used like very reactively. It's usually not so something comes basically kind of explodes, for lack of a better term, as opposed to it being used as like a preventative measure. um, and so for me, like that was literally my first experience with counseling was because, I'm sitting in the ER and they're like, okay, you're 17 and you just swallowed a whole bottle of pills. We are concerned. You have to go talk to a therapist now. And I'm like, oh, and like, even for me, like I said, at that point, I was 17. And up until that point, I had never, been to a therapist, had never had a conversation with anybody about counseling or what the potential benefits could be. I didn't even really know that I was depressed until it was like, okay, something is clearly not okay, right? Like what's going on. And admittedly, that first go around, because, I was still young, I think I went for like a couple of months because I had to, and then I just kind of stopped going. And then, a lot of other things happened between, the ages of like 18 and I want to say maybe like 24, maybe 23, 24. And I realized that, I was still, experiencing depressive episodes. I was, even as I got older, I was, experiencing anxiety attacks, which I had never had before, and was just like, what is going on? And so, as I got older, I really took it upon myself to really, it took a while for me to get to that point, but I realized that a lot of what was holding me back from going back to therapy after, my first stint with it was a lot of, kind of cultural things, like Kit was saying, a lot of, well, what are people going to say? And, just a lot of the things that we heard about people growing up, because it's like either the minute you say therapist or anything about mental health, automatically we hear that C word. And it's like, oh, it's like if I go to therapy, people are going to think I'm crazy. And it's like, not necessarily. And it's like, it really took a long time for me personally first to do the work to destigmatize, mental health care. And so I went to therapy for maybe like 6 months when like I was 20, maybe like 23. And then I went back in like 2019 and, insurance changing. And, I actually just recently, kind of decided to take a pause, if you will. I started therapy again, right kind of at the top of the pandemic, April of 2020, and was, doing it consistently right up until I guess like December of last year. And I'm so grateful that I did it. In between there, I also, my church, has a Bible college. And so while I was, enrolled there, I actually pursued, a master's degree in Christian counseling, which is not clinically focused, but definitely looks at things more from a faith-based point of view. And that year that I did that program was eye-opening. I learned a lot about myself, but it also, helped me to frame how I grew up, and really revealed things about my family that I hadn't really learned before. And like I said earlier, it took a long time for me to really realize kind of I'm at a place now where I'm really big on duality. Where, especially when it, comes to mental health and, dealing with, cultural barriers and dealing with, kind of pushback from your family is, learning to kind of separate and hold two things at the same time. Whereas understanding like, my parents and my family, they did the best they could, and also realizing they're not where I am, in terms of like their mental health journey. And so, I've personally resolved that I got to do what's best for me. And if that's going to therapy, it's going to therapy. If that's taking a break from therapy, because healing is hard work, we all know that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to take a break, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. But just realizing that, like, hoping, I guess, rather, that, you know, by me taking the steps to do what I need to do to take care of my mental health, even if that doesn't necessarily inspire people around me to run out and go find a therapist, even though I wish it would, you know, just understanding that everybody's journey is different. But I have noticed that, like I said before, because by me being more vocal about my journey and being such a huge advocate for people going to therapy, I have started to notice that the people around me, even if they're not necessarily ready to actually seek help themselves first, they're definitely more willing to have the conversation,
Yeah.
which is really good, because, you know, I think I'll be 30 in April. 10 years ago, it was like pulling teeth to get some people around me to even, you know, admit that they might, you know, have had a moment of experiencing depression.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just, you know, just kind of jumping on that topic is, you know, fortunately for so many people, their families understanding, and, you know, okay, well, this is kind of, so I guess what I'm saying is some families are more open-minded than others to change. And so what I'm kind of wondering is, how would you, and I will direct this question to Kid first, how would you advise young people whose parents are not understanding of mental health illnesses approach the topic? And of course we'll hear from our other two guests, but would like your input, Kid.
I really appreciate Victoria's your sharing, because, you know, you actually hit so many points, you know, the experience that we actually have as a young person. You see, you know, I mean, you're perfectly right. You know, I mean, you took the pill, you didn't feel well, you went to the ER, and all they said is, you know, you got to talk to a therapist. Why? You know, you don't even know. Why do I have to talk to a therapist? Is it because I'm crazy? No, you know. So you see, the thing is, you know, we were supposed to get from our family members, okay, whoa, you're actually having diarrhea, you know, I mean, you may actually have a food poisoning. So our parents or caretaker is supposed to tell us that, okay, you're not feeling right, you know, this is your problem, you need to get this help. But what if our caretaker and parents actually don't even understand what problem it is? So who's going to be there to tell the young people that this is your problem, you need to get this help, and this is going to help you, you know? So that's actually, you know, perfectly right, Victoria. You know, you have to go on your own exploration about what the problem is. And then you actually took so much time to figure out, okay, oh, this is really my problem. So I'm going to go back to, you know, therapist, because I think that therapy will help me with this. So that's actually echo a lot of young people experience. I have young people, when they first came as a teenager, trust me, all they want to do is just to stop coming, because they don't think that talking to a therapist will help. Especially, I have to say that sometimes the patient or the teenagers actually talk about the problem of the parents. The parents keep arguing, and all day they're saying that, you know, you are actually such a burden to me, you know, I wish, you know, we'll ever have you. I mean, this is not going to be something that anybody wants to hear, you know. But the young people would say, what does it do to talk to you about this? You know, I mean, my parents not going to help, you know, not going to change, you know, I mean, you could try to talk to them, but I don't think they're going to change either, you know. So a lot of times, you know, the problem has to be defined so that we will actually be able to accept the help that we need, that is supposed to help us with that. So Victoria actually went on your own exploration about this experience. We need to do a lot of education. The good thing nowadays is because the young people talk to each other about mental health issues. It actually has changed, you know, in the past 20 years, you know. So far, you know, you could go on internet and actually do a screening about, you know, depression, anxiety. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, because sometimes, you know, I actually get a lot of young people telling me that they are borderline personality, that I have to tell them that you're not, you know, I mean, you may have mood swing, but this is not borderline personality, you know. So sometimes we overdiagnose themselves, you know, so that's another problem, you know. So I have to explain to them, educate them, and then while educating the young people about your problem and also the help that you need and why this is going to help. Just like I said, you know, a moment ago, you know, this young girl, you know, who said, my parents actually keep arguing every day. I feel so bad. I want them to stop, but I'm not going to be able to get them to stop. Can you tell them to stop? Well, obviously, they're not going to stop just because I asked them to, you know. So in that sense, the young people feel hopeless. What's the point to actually get me the pill or actually therapy if the problem is my parents and you cannot do anything about it, you know? So sometimes I actually have to not only redefine the problem and help them understand what can you do about the problem and what can you do about things that you cannot actually have control with. You could actually help yourself feel better. You could help yourself to actually get on with your life. Think about what you like to do in your future so that, I have to say, you could actually move on, you know, from your family, you know. Sometimes we do have to keep a distance, you know. I mean, if they keep arguing, the best thing is to not to listen to them, you know. So that's what happens, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I myself struggle with that with my parents. Sometimes, kind of just have to keep a little bit of a distance with them and look after your well-being, I think, first, right? Because then how could you help others if you're not well yourself? What would you say to that, Janeth?
Yeah, great points. Actually, I was had so much stuff in my mind. I'm gonna start with my personal experience, and then later on, I'm gonna say I remember what I was gonna say about what Kit mentioned. I started going to therapy by force at the age of 18. Of course, I was depressed way before that, but I didn't realize that. And it was because a lot of family issues, family dynamic, domestic violence, and we can only imagine alcohol abuse and everything, which is pretty normal for my community sometimes, and depending on the family. And it was a very traumatic event, and the next day I was in therapy, and I looked at the therapist and I was like, why am I here? Like, why? How are you gonna help me? You're not gonna solve this problem. God couldn't do it. Why will you do it? And I was very defensive. I was 18, but we were able to match culturally. She was Hispanic. Hispanic. And she was able to respect my points of views, and I felt comfortable with her. I came religiously, even though sometimes I disagree with her, and we agreed that the mood disorder was there, because sometimes she was my best friend and sometimes she wasn't, but she was always very supportive. Throughout the years, I'm okay with sharing anxiety and depression, and PTSD, and sometimes it's very difficult. And as per people around me, I lost a lot of people around me because I went to therapy, because I talked about my issues. I was called crazy. I was called many things, overthinking and all that stuff. I lost many friends, not because I feel, not because now I believe because we were in France. It's just that it's so difficult to talk about it sometimes. It's difficult to say I'm sad, or for them to tell us how to feel better, or just listen. Sometimes listening, if it helps, but sometimes listening feels weird. So especially if what you're listening to might not be so fun to hear. As per my family, here's a thought. I just remember, I lost a lot of family because they were not supportive. Due to the traumatic event, I don't no longer speak to my father, so my father was not in the picture. And my family was against me for doing what I did at the moment, but it was only to protect my family, my immediate family, which is more important, my mom and my sister. But there, I lost them, great, but I had my therapist, and I honestly say that if it wasn't because of her, I probably wouldn't be here, because as I do have to admit, there have been a lot of suicidal thoughts in my mind when I was younger. Sometimes I come time to time, no plan, no nothing like that, but yes, it's something that is present, and I'm not going to deny it to anyone, because it's sometimes is you it helps to hear that this other person went through it and is overcoming it, or at least waving in the wave, because sometimes it's very hard. And I lost, and it's difficult to talk about it, but it is important. In my professional aspect, I worked in behavior health. Right now, I see patients. I screen for depression and anxiety. I see teens, and I also see adults. And I like to talk, and I just put it to them as that this is just a conversation. It's you and I. This is confidential. The good thing about talking to me is I'm not gonna go to everyone about your business, and I'm gonna listen to you, and I'm gonna give my feedback. But you can always tell me if you feel uncomfortable. And yeah, I don't know if I answered the question. I went in circles, but
No, I mean, thank you for that. I mean, I can imagine that it's easy to share that, and we are grateful that you did, and of course, you know, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, we're grateful for you. And yeah, I mean, I myself don't suffer of depression, but I do, like, you know, so it's weird because sometimes you're like you hear people talking about like, oh, I have anxiety and I have this and I have that, and you don't even know what it is, right? Like you don't even know what anxiety is. And so I kind of just was like, oh, well, that must be like awful to deal with, and until I came to terms that I actually have anxiety a lot. So it just often happens that when you hear people talk about it, it kind of opens your mind onto like what you might need help with, because you can't seek help if you don't know what you're going through. And so I think it's very important that we share, and whatever you feel comfortable sharing, and you know, because again, you can kind of see, like you said, Janeth, you're not alone in this. And so it kind of just destigmatizes the topic as well, to know that it's not as uncommon as many people believe that it is. So thank you for
Please
that.
let me,
yeah, it's very
please let me piggyback. You know,
Yeah.
Janet, you're very, very courageous. You know, I really, really appreciate your sharing.
thank you.
And you actually talked about exactly the experience that sometimes you are the only person, you know, who have the courage to deal with the problems in your family.
Oh,
Yeah.
you
And that makes it even harder. Yes, sorry. Yeah.
said earlier that oh, it just went. I'm a little nervous, but yes, it sometimes you are the only one, and sometimes the therapist is the one that's there. I remember you said we never change our parents. We can't change their actions sometimes, and that took me years, and maybe like 5, maybe more, years to realize I can't change my parents. That's who they are, and I can't change my family. But I can change the way I think, the way I approach the situation, the way that I decide to go and continue, either at the conversation or my actions. There were times, many times, that I never thought before I acted. I was very impulsive, because the emotion was strong. And yes, that's what I was thinking when you were mentioning, Kay. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No problem. No problem. Exactly. You know, I mean, you got another good point, you know. I actually ask the young people when they, you know, say, I mean, I don't see any points to come here. You know, I mean, I don't have anything that I want to say. I ask them, if you could just give me 3 times, you know, 3 sessions, you know, I mean, it wouldn't, you know, I mean, hurt a lot, you know, you just give me 3 sessions, 3 hours, you know, and we'll see how it goes, you know, if I got to talk to you and if you got to talk to me. Because sometimes what I want to actually share with the young people is, if you actually don't have anybody you can talk to in your family and even among your friends, maybe therapists could actually be, you know, the person that you can try. And I actually wish that all the young people will have, you know, a therapist who can actually guide them, you know, because I think this is what I was looking for when I was a young person. So that's why, you know, I mean, Janet, I am very, very happy that you become a therapist yourself. I'm sure you're going to help a lot of young people. Yeah. I want to actually point out one more thing, you know, that you also talk about. While we talk about cultures, you know, I mean, I like to actually point it out. What we're actually talking about more is the family values, you know. But I would like to say that, you know, I mean, one thing that Victoria said, they did the best they can. You know, I mean, our parents, our caretaker, they do not know better. They were in survival mode. They couldn't actually know better. So when we talk about culture and mental health, we're not trying to actually make them look back. You know, this is not the case. You know, I mean, sometimes I explain it this way, if the mental health is never a vocabulary in their dictionary, they cannot say it, they cannot use it. We have to actually give them, the meaning of the word so that they can use it. So sometimes this is actually, what we have to have the attitude with. And sometimes, we also encourage the young people to understand there are actually many cultures, not only just the family values.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say that sometimes we also have to watch out the social media because there's another culture going on that, everybody say that they're depressed and anxious, and suicidal. But we also, need to actually understand. I have, some young people who tell me that, when they actually look at the social media, they got frustrated, they get very upset because everybody sounds like they are depressed or anxious. But the things that they actually talk about wasn't depression or anxiety at all. They were talking about, their frustration, things that, they're not happy with, but they're far from depression. Depression wasn't just feeling sad. Depression is actually feeling sad, plus hopeless, plus feeling meaningless. It takes a lot more steps, to get to feel depressed. And that's why depression is actually hurting a lot more than just feeling sad.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree. I mean, it's a very dangerous territory to self-diagnose. So I think everyone should see a therapist. I saw a therapist a few years ago. I mean, I think that what Janeth said is, finding a therapist that you can feel connected with is very important because I remember when I was going to therapy and it wasn't anything like I just felt like I there was like childhood trauma that I needed to deal with, but it was like I didn't click with my therapist, and so I stopped going. And I haven't gone back, but it's definitely something that I'm looking into getting into again. But definitely don't self-diagnose. Definitely look for therapists who can diagnose you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've actually hit past 7:30, and if you need to log off, feel free to do so. We are gonna, but if you are okay to stay for a few more minutes, and just gonna touch on like maybe 2 more questions, and then we can end this great conversation that we're having. So one thing that I really want to touch on is while it is important to kind of look after your well-being and your own mental health and make sure that your mental health is in a healthy situation, there is a lot of, at least from my personal experience, there's a lot of guilt that you can carry with kind of like so sometimes I love my mom to death, but sometimes I kind of just got to shut down things that are kind of harmful to my mental health. But then after like the whole day, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad. Like I should not have done that. Like I feel really, really bad, and I should speak to her and I should call her. And so basically what I'm getting into is how do you advise people deal with this guilt and, cope with just doing it in a healthier way? And I can move on with you, Victoria.
That's a good question. I was gonna say, I can't remember exactly what Janeth had said earlier, but she said something that made me think about how important it is to set boundaries. And it's hard. I know that's another boundaries has become like, I feel like that's like the word of the year this year. Like I see it like everywhere, like all over social media. But I mean, that's the reality of it. I think that is a lack of boundaries is actually probably one of the largest contributing factors as to why a lot of people do even have some of the mental health issues that they have, especially when it comes to like relationships with their families. They don't have good boundaries. If they don't even really have a concept of what boundaries are to begin with. And so there's a lot of enmeshment, there's a lot of projecting. Parents and caretakers and older generations a lot of times will project, whatever they're going through onto the younger generations. They don't necessarily hold a lot of respect for the younger generation. So there's just a lot there. And so I will say, one, it's hard. I don't like, I can't really sugarcoat it. Sometimes, it is hard to deal with it and to not feel guilty. And so, it's a process. I tell people anything, especially when it comes to your mental health, it's a journey and it's a process. And, some days you are going to feel guilty. And not even just with your parents, but I think about, it's been actually really tricky for me lately because I have other friends who deal with their own mental health struggles. And like I said before, like everybody's in a different place. And one thing that I've realized that's really hard to deal with is when you know that somebody else has mental health struggles, but they're not yet at a place where they're willing to hold themselves accountable to do what they need to do for themselves to get better. And it's like when you are in that place, when you're actively, seeking help and actively trying to, kind of reframe the way that you think and experience the world, and they're not there yet, that's also sometimes where it can get weird because you have to set a boundary there to protect yourself. And, it sucks. Like I say, there's no easy way to say it sometimes. Sometimes it just sucks. And I think it's even more important in those moments. I'm grateful that I do have a good support system. I do have community. And that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about is, we talked earlier before about how a lot of people, especially young people, don't necessarily always have the privilege to be able to talk to their parents openly about certain things. And so it's like, I'm definitely a big advocate of telling people, if you have nobody else to talk to, we don't know each other, but you can talk to me. Like I think it's incredibly important to foster healthy community. So that in those moments where you do have to set those tough boundaries, where people in your life, where it's like you would want to talk to them about certain things and you want to be open with them, but you get to a point where you realize you kind of just can't. Sometimes, you have to set that boundary, and it's helpful. It's so helpful to be able to have other people around you that aren't in that kind of weird space, so that, you can still feel supported. And that you still are able to have those conversations. So it's, the long and short, I would just say, sometimes it just sucks.
Yeah.
But but it's a process, and it does get better, I think, over time. Like I said, for me, like I said earlier, it's a lot about duality for me. Like I separate, especially, when it comes to my family, I'm learning to separate the parent from the person. It's like they're my parent, or they may be my friend, but at the same time, they're also just another adult human being trying to figure this thing called life out, And so it's like a lot of times, I think sometimes we may take things a little too personally, and that's not to say don't hold people accountable for harm that they cause, but again, there's a lot of people that are, experiencing life without the right language, without the right tools, without the right resources. And so, they're just doing things without being cognizant of the impact that it has on other people. And realizing that, like, this thing that they did may have caused harm or may have frustrated me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're like a terrible person, and, learning to set those boundaries in that you can still love that person from a distance. You maybe don't have to interact with them all the time. And give yourself grace. It's okay to take care of yourself first. It's okay to prioritize yourself. And, you shouldn't feel guilty about it. You will, like we're humans, like, I think a lot of times we're told, in learning to be compassionate for others, there's a balance that has to be had, and it's a tricky balance to find. But it's like there is a balance to be had of being compassionate, but also prioritizing yourself. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the first step is to just acknowledge that you are going to feel guilty. So,
yeah.
What do you think, Kid? What would you say to that?
Well, I think, many times it feels like a lose-lose situation because either we feel hurt if we suck it up, or we feel guilt if we confront them.
Mm-hmm.
But I will actually ask them to think about what makes you think, that you feel guilty about it. Mm-hmm. You probably feel that, your family members, feel bad, after you confront them. The reason why you feel guilty, because you feel that, they're hurt. Is that a way that you can actually confront them? Is that a way that you can tell them your feelings without making them feel as hurt? So technically, I believe this is possible that, we can tell our family members that something I don't want to hear from you, ever say again, without actually making them feel guilty or making them feel bad, I do point it out that, I think Victoria hits a good point, the boundary, and also separate the person, or the relationship from the behavior. we confront their behaviors. We don't confront that person. Yesenia, you also said that you love your parents, you love your mom, but there's something that you don't want to listen to her. So we can actually specify that, it's the behavior that you did that I cannot deal with, So I want you to stop that behavior, but I love you very much, So in that sense, we could actually free ourselves from the guilt because we are not rejecting the person, our family members. We're just rejecting their behaviors.
That's good.
Absolutely. Yep. That was a very good point. It made me see things a little clearer. You're over here offering therapy. What would you say to that, Janeth? Do you sometimes struggle with feeling guilt, and how do you deal with it if you do?
Yeah, actually, I struggle with guilt more at the beginning than I do now. I've been in therapy for maybe 10 years, so it took a while, but it's like Kit mentioned, I learned how to confront. I learned confrontation is not always bad. Confrontation can be positive, and confrontation can be saying, using our I statements. I feel this, I will like this, and in the future maybe we can do this or something, right? So I do have to admit I had a lot of a lot of differences with my mom, and I learned to use my I statements. Nevertheless, sometimes I do feel guilty for maybe not messaging her, maybe not doing this or not doing that, because culturally I'm expected to live with her, I'm expected to be with her, I'm expected to do a lot of stuff. But how do I combine my Mexican culture and my upbringings here in the United States? So I do confrontation, like it says. I tell my mom, I'm feeling this. I just want you to know that I still love you and I care for you. And let me know how you feel, because this is also important to ask how she's doing. As per others, yeah, I don't feel as guilty now, but definitely in the past.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I like same thing is happening to me. I'm blanking. I was gonna say something and then I completely flew by me. Actually came up now. I feel like a lot of, again, this touches on culture. A lot of it has to do with values, right? So like collectivist cultures versus individualistic. So I feel like, I personally feel like I got the best of both worlds because I have the collectivism from the Mexican aspect and then the individualistic. So I'm able to, kind of see, okay, this is probably like not okay. It's expected of me within the Mexican culture, but it's just not a healthy way. And so agree again. We're like both Mexican, so go figure. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm just gonna conclude it with one more question, and then I'll let you go. I know it's like late in the day and you probably have very tired and stuff. So, okay. How do you think that we can start shifting these perceptions in the sense of course, it's important to kind of speak to our family members about this and trying and see, not convince them, but like allow them to open their mind to different things. How do you think that we can actually reach the same goal for more people, like reach a bigger audience, if that's the right word? And we can start with you, Kit.
Well, I think you are doing it, I think having, the Therapy Thursday is actually a great idea, I think you choose the path for IG is also a wonderful idea because I'm sure, there would be a lot of, more young people actually on IG, than other, webinars kind of thing, Yeah, so I think you are doing it, and thank you so much, for letting us to have this opportunity to talk together too, And in many ways, I think nowadays we can see that the culture is changing, that the fact that we're able to recognize this problem. I can tell you something, back then, 20 years ago, there were studies that, studying, the second generations of immigrants, pretty much like, many of us, what happened is they actually realize that the utilization of the mental health service is actually very low for the second generation. When we thought that, by the second generation, they should actually know better. They should actually be more open in terms of mental health, No, the study actually told us that it's wrong. The second generation is still very much affected by the family values of the first generation, their parents, their caretakers. And because of that, they carry the same stereotypes, and they also, not wanting to upset their parents or family caretakers, so they won't get to mental health service. One of the toughest things that I deal with is when I actually see a young people and I have to send them to ER because they are so suicidal. And then I explain to the parents, this is actually necessary. You're not going to be able to keep an eye on, him or her, and this is actually better for, your kids to actually go, start to help, as soon as possible. And then I would see the parents, crying, and I thought that they understand, and the next thing come out is they will actually look at the kids and say, do you really have to go?
It's so unfortunate.
And I almost want to, curse out, sorry about that, I spend so much time explaining to you that why this is necessary. And all you care about is, is it really necessary to go? Yes. Of course it's necessary. What I'm talking about, Yeah. So sometimes we're actually at the verge, that we need to embrace the change. So I really admire, Victoria and Janeth, courage to speak it out. And I believe more people speak out actually will encourage more people to reach out for help. Mm-hmm. And when I actually talk about, I hope that everybody have a therapist, it's not necessary to have a professional therapist. There's no way that we can actually have a professional therapist for every young people. But just like, like maybe pastor, or maybe sometimes a mentor, or maybe even a good friend, who's actually willing to listen, could actually work like, a therapist. And as long as the young people willing to start talking with someone that they can trust, but I have to actually, point it out. They have to talk to someone that they can trust, because sometimes the worst thing is they start talking with someone and then this person actually make it known to the whole world, So that's not necessarily helpful. Yeah. So I believe speaking up, will actually be, a great way to start.
Definitely. Yeah. I feel like sometimes myself personally, I feel like it's better to speak to someone who doesn't know anyone that I know, and that would be best. It's too much craziness sometimes. What would you say, Victoria? How do you think that we can change the stigma, and would you agree that the newer generation?
Yeah, I totally agree with Kit, because it's, I think and not just with mental health, honestly, with anything, I feel like with any societal issue, if you will, that there's stigma around. The stigma usually comes from just like a lack of information and a lack of knowledge. People just really don't know enough. They go off, other people's perceptions and what other people have heard about something. And so it's like, I think a lot of the negative perceptions about going to therapy and about mental health is just because people just don't actually know what they're talking about. Like, people just kind of say anything that, they go off of, what they've heard, their families talk about. But it's like, they don't, like, nobody in your family has actually ever been to therapy. Nobody in your family is a mental health professional. So, like, why are you listening to them? Like, they don't know what they're talking about, And so, I think it's definitely important. Like I said earlier, it's just, for me, it's really just about sometimes just starting the conversation. And I have noticed that, like, the more I have opened up, the more I have noticed that the people around me are more comfortable with opening up. And so I think that's really just the key. Like Kit said, like, this forum is amazing. Like, the fact that this is something that happens so regularly is like, people see that. And, even if, I know how Instagram could be fickle. People kind of pop in and they pop out. And even if people aren't here staying the whole time, they still see it. they'll see the notification, come up. And that's, another thing that I've learned is just like when it comes to creating change, um, it's not a sprint. It's a marathon, it's a journey, like I said before. And so it's like, just really realizing and understanding that like right now, I think we're definitely starting to see the seeds of change in this generation, which I'm like so grateful for. Like, I love millennials and I love Gen Z so much. I love us. And so it's like, we may not see like the drastic sweeping change that I think we would all like in a perfect world. I think that we would love to see. We might not see that in the next 15 to 20 years, but if the earth doesn't spontaneously combust 50 years from now, if this floating rock is still here in 100 years, I think by then definitely there will have been a major shift culturally, and not even just within like different ethnic cultures, but I think the global culture around mental health, I think Kit spoke to this earlier, is starting to change. And while social media is a tool and it can be great and it can be bad, but I think social media is, when it is being utilized correctly, I think social media is one of the things that's definitely catalyzing the change, because it's marrying kind of like the mass reach that like I guess television would have once had, but at the same time, I'm grateful. I follow so many licensed mental health professionals on Instagram. And so I'm grateful because you have the clinical experience from mental health professionals, and then you also have people like us who just have their own personal experiences dealing with their own mental health. And we're able to come together on platforms like this and have these conversations. So you're getting both like truth with like real life experience and like scientific fact behind everything. And like I said, you're able to reach a much wider audience. So like I said, even if people aren't necessarily people might not be commenting, we might not see our follower counts go up drastically after tonight, but people are watching and people are listening. And so, like I said, the seeds of change, they're being planted right now. Again, like I said, I'm Christian, and we talk a lot about like what we call like the law of reaping and sowing. And we talk a lot in like parables and analogies about planting and harvesting. And so my pastor says a lot, one man plants, another man waters, and then God gives the increase. And so it's like right now, I think what we're doing in this dispensation of time, we're planting those seeds. And I think as years progress, as technology continues to develop, and hopefully as healthcare becomes more accessible, that'll be the watering. And like I said, hopefully if we're still around in 50 years, I think that's when we'll really start to see the increase, and, hopefully no stigma, and just, more wholesome conversations, and more, just healthier relationships with our brains and with our
Absolutely.
emotions. So.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Social media is slowly but surely making a difference. I'm not sure about
Mhm.
slowly, but it is making a big difference. What about you, Janeth? What would you say is necessary to end
I
the stigma?
I agree that definitely social media plays a big role. At the same time, it's important to do outreach. We when we at least when we think about therapists, we think about this person that's gonna sit down and I'm gonna sit in the couch and I'm gonna tell them all of my traumas and emotions. But no, it's actually another human being like you and I. Um, so I think outreach, exposure to therapists, exposure to mental health, and also educating our providers, because if you go to the doctor once a year for a checkup, an annual checkup, the doctor should ask you how you feeling, because it's
Mhm.
well-being, your emotional being, your mental health, it's part of you, it's your body. So I think educating our providers, because we may think that our providers know about mental health, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just know that, yeah, there's a therapist in the fifth floor, but that's all. um,
Yeah.
is educating them in order for them to educate their teens or anyone who comes to their doors for a checkup, and encourage them and listening to them. Of course, there's a lot of barriers to that healthcare system and so on, because they only probably have limited time with them. But I think definitely doing the outreach, exposure, it's very important.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, We're gonna conclude this amazing conversation. Again, thank you so much. I think we had a very good conversation. I'm very happy that you joined us. Very happy that you opened up to us. And I've learned a lot. I'm very happy that I was part of this conversation. And again, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And we're raising awareness as much as we can to these kind of problems. So thank you and have a lovely night. Please keep an eye out for an article that I'll be writing, a short video that we're going to be going to summarize tonight. And so keep an eye out on our social media. We can also share it with you through email. And again, thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thanks for having
Bye,
us.
It's
everybody.
true,
Thank
Yasina. Thank
you.
you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night. Bye bye.